President.
Senator from Texas.
Madam President, last night, the American people heard from President Biden in his first address to a joint session of Congress. The American people heard him speak about many of the same themes that he touched on in his inauguration: unifying the country, healing the soul of our nation, healing the divisions that divide us. It sounds great, but those who paid attention to the president's actions know that his rhetoric and his actions don't line up. The only legislative achievement so far for President Biden has been an eye-popping $1.9 trillion piece of spending that was branded as COVID-19 relief. It was so controversial that our Democratic colleagues didn't bother to use the standard legislative procedure. Instead, they used the budget reconciliation process so they could make it a law without a single Republican vote, hardly coming together and unifying the country. As expected, President Biden had the audacity to brand this legislation as the reason why we made such progress in fighting COVID-19. He touted the fact that America has provided more than 220 million COVID vaccinations during his first 100 days in office. But he didn't mention the fact that less than 1% of the funding in his signature legislation actually supported vaccinations. Less than 1%. Less than 10% was directly related to COVID-19 at all. If there were any doubts that this liberal spending binge was about to end, President Biden cleared that up last night too. He talked about his more than $2.6 trillion American Jobs Plan, which relies on a very generous interpretation of the word infrastructure, or should I say Orwellian. He discussed the $1.8 trillion American Families Plan, which includes everything from universal preschool to free community college to mandatory paid leave policies and tax provisions. You know, you gotta love politicians when they talk about giving away free stuff. The folks back home know better. Somebody has to pay for it. As my friend Senator Tim Scott said in the Republican response last night, these policies would put Washington even more in the middle of Americans' lives, from cradle to college. These three proposals total more than $6 trillion, an amount so large it's hard for any of us to wrap our head around it. And that's on top of the money that was spent last year in a bipartisan effort to defeat COVID-19. The proposals equate to a spending rate of $60 billion a day during the president's first 100 days in office. $6 trillion is 1/4 of our gross domestic product. If you convert our country's World War II spending into today's dollars, the three Biden spending proposals are even more expensive than what it cost us to arm and defeat Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany. But I want to be clear, these aren't wartime expenses. These aren't even necessary expenses in many cases. These proposals have absolutely nothing to do with our current fight against COVID-19. $200 billion to build or retrofit, quote, sustainable, close quote, places to live. $225 billion for paid family leave, $178 billion on electric vehicle chargers, more socialism for rich people, $400 billion for home-based care. This money adds up pretty quickly. I'm not saying our country should cut off all of our spending altogether. There are necessary expenses and investments that need to be made. But this is not the time for a spending binge. We need to make smart financial decisions that will serve the next generation, not drive them further and further into debt. The biggest question here, though, is, as with any type of government spending, is how are you going to pay for it? For the Biden administration, the answer is simple: higher taxes. In fact, the president has proposed the largest tax hikes in more than a half a century. Now, Economics 101 would teach you that tax increases aren't a clear and easy way to boost revenue, especially when your economy is already on a fragile footing. President Obama observed as much when we were recovering from the Great Recession of 2008, that raising taxes during a recovery from a recession is a bad idea. Raising trillions of dollars in new taxes will not set us up for a strong recovery. It'll simply throw even more wrenches into our sluggish economic engine. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the American economy was on a roll. The economy was booming, unemployment was at a 50-year low, companies were coming back on shore, moving their headquarters to the United States, in part because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act set the stage for this recovery. Instead of building upon what we did in 2017, the administration now wants to repeal those tax provisions in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and double down on the old, tired talking points that America can simply tax and spend and regulate itself into prosperity. Massive tax hikes are not the way to stabilize a shaky recovery. And I worry how much damage these increases will do if our Democratic colleagues insist on doing more partisan party line legislating. The president did nothing to ease my concern